Yesterday, one of our viewers asked in iCave Answers for basically a roundup of all we know about the M1X MacBook Pro, and because it was off the cuff, I missed out a bunch of stuff. So let's make this a full-on one-stop shop on everything you need to know about Apple's new top-of-the-line notebooks. I'm iCave Dave and I simplify Apple so that everything just works for you, and in this video we'll be covering the design, displays, camera, connectivity, audio, M1X performance, battery life, pricing and release date. So get ready, hit like and subscribe, and also thank you to Apple Tomorrow on Twitter for all of the renders. Go and follow him. First up, the design. The 2021 MacBook Pro models are expected to feature flatter faces to the shell, dropping the gradual curve of the display assembly and the bottom case in favour of lines more akin to the iPhone 12, giving a clean modern look without changing the overall look of the device. They'll still be unmistakably MacBooks. It is possible, however, that the chassis will be thinner on the base and a little thicker on the display assembly in order to accommodate what comes in our next segment. While the iMac refresh brought light-coloured bezels and a combination of vivid colours and more muted tones, it's expected that the MacBook Pro models will retain the more refined colour options that already exist: space grey, silver and possibly a gold, although I'd personally love to see Apple bring some of the colour choices from the current iPhone Pro lineup for the more adventurous. Of course, I also worked with Apple Tomorrow on some even more outlandish colour combinations too, and I still think the black and gold looks really hot. There's of course an outside chance that Apple will bring the iMac's design language with its light grey bezels and white keyboard to the MacBook Pro 2, though the consensus right now is that Apple's Pro devices will get the darker display surrounds as a point of difference. And speaking of displays, in terms of displays, Apple is reportedly bringing their Mini-LED technology that's currently in the M1 12.9-inch iPad Pro to the MacBooks, and here in both sizes, 14-inch and 16-inch. The Mini-LED display, which Apple markets as XDR or Extreme Dynamic Range, gives us a 1,000,000 to 1 contrast ratio, with the iPad version delivering 1000 nits of full screen brightness and 1600 nits of peak brightness, making the displays more than twice as bright as the previous models. The Mini-LED technology works by splitting down the display into a number of localized dimming zones. In the case of the iPad Pro, it's 2,500, each made up of 4 LED backlights that allow the display to be fully dim in areas of black, although it does mean that some blooming can be visible around very small sprites on the screen. The displays will also support Apple's True Tone, P3 wide colour gamut, and more, though whether 120Hz variable ProMotion will come to this year's Macs is unclear. In terms of the cameras though, Apple is expected to up the built-in FaceTime cameras to a 1080p sensor, whilst also adding even better image signal processors, and bringing the new background bokeh effects to the Mac in macOS Monterey. For some time, the built-in cameras in Macs have been a little bit of a butt of jokes, but I have to say that I've never found them to be too bad, and certainly better than the vast majority of PC laptop cameras. One of the biggest limitations of a front-facing laptop camera is the depth available to house the camera, and without the depth for movable lenses for autofocus. So if Apple's able to move some of the bulk and the thickness away from the base of the computer and up into the display lid, that could make a lot of sense. Apple of course has great front-facing cameras and rear cameras in their iPhones. However, these are much thicker devices, which is why you're able to put a lot better camera technology in there. Connectivity. Here we have some huge changes. Right from the first quarter of 2021, we'd been hearing that there would be some new ports, or old ones anyway. First, MagSafe is making a triumphant return with, we assume, a direct connection rather than the current wireless solution. Also coming back, the HDMI port and SD card reader. The SD card reader is something that basically every YouTube creator is angry that it's not there, even though most of them have moved on to CF cards at this point. But still, they want their SD card readers back, because it's a Pro port. Finally, in the cable department, there will be about 3 USB-C ports, and a number of these will also be Thunderbolt. Not quite sure how many though. In terms of wireless, expect the latest Bluetooth standards as well as Wi-Fi 6E, which will enable the fastest possible wireless connectivity too. Audio. On the audio side, I think it's probably a good shout to assume that the M1X MacBook Pro will be getting some really decent speakers. Studio quality, as Apple will call them if they follow their normal naming convention. But I'd assume they'll also be able to output Apple's spatial audio format to simulate audio sources coming from all around you. Apple uses some kind of witchcraft in general to provide far more bass than their tiny computers should be able to provide in most cases, and I'd assume that these MacBook Pros with their M1X redesign will be able to keep up. The other aspect of audio, of course, is input, and Apple's studio mics in the MacBook Pros are recognised as pretty good here. Perhaps not quite studio quality, but a pretty decent USB mic level, and that's not a bad thing at all. These things will certainly be able to hold their own in a Zoom call, but thanks to the M1X, they'll be very capable of far more than that too. M1X. So the M1X is going to be the main selling point of these things, and the best way to understand why they'll be so revolutionary is to take a little look at its smaller brother, the M1. The M1 has 4 high efficiency cores and 4 high performance cores, all of which are based on the core designs from the iPhone 12's A14. It also includes an 8-core GPU, although the entry-level models did use a lower binned version where 1 GPU was disabled. The M1X doubles the performance cores up to 8 with just a pair of efficiency cores in there. It's also reportedly going to come with a 16 or 32 core GPU option. In a single core benchmarks, the M1X will likely perform similarly to the M1, but in multi-core there's double the performance cores, so it will absolutely fly here, probably performing around 14,000 points in Geekbench. Just like the M1, we are expecting the M1X GPU to be integrated into the same system on a chip and sharing the same pool of unified memory with the M1X CPU cores, reducing latency and overheads so the data doesn't have to be copied between system memory and GPU specific memory. Also, because of the nature of ARM's architecture, the CPU can actually bring through and process instructions faster, all because the instructions are of the same length, removing the step that would normally check the length of the instructions at the decoder level. The specialist hardware inside the SoC also makes a massive difference, being able to offload a lot of processing from the main CPU and GPUs. So just for reference, the M1's SoC includes a CPU, GPU, image signal processor, digital signal processor for more mathematically intensive tasks like decompressing files, the neural processing unit, secure enclave, and a video encoder in hardware. So basically the M1X is going to be quite the powerhouse. Battery. The current 16-inch MacBook Pro has effectively the largest battery that you can legally put in something that you might want to fly on an aeroplane with at some point at 100 watt-hours. And I wouldn't be surprised if it stays at a similar capacity for the M1X version, with the 14-inch getting more capacity than the current 13-inch. Now, bearing in mind that the M1 13-inch can offer up to 18 hours of use on a single battery charge, the life on these is probably going to be pretty mind-blowing. It was suggested that the 16-inch could offer between 25 and 30 hours, though these were simply third-party estimates without having any real information on the system's power draw. But either way, I think it's safe to say that these will be impressive. Pricing. Based on what Apple has done so far with the updated Apple Silicon Mac line, so far the new versions have arrived at or below the pricing of the Intel devices they're replacing. The MacBook Air and 13-inch MacBook Pro with M1 kept the pricing exactly the same, and the Mac Mini actually reduced the starting price by $100. So my best guess would be that these will do exactly the same thing. The 14-inch MacBook Pro with M1X replaces the 4.13-inch model, which currently starts at $1799, and the 16-inch is currently starting at $2399. The only caveat here is that when Apple introduced the new MiniLED display technology in their iPad Pro 12.9-inch model, they did increase the price here by $100. However, the iPads have always been based on Apple Silicon, so there's no savings here to be made versus the Intel models that they replace, because Intel charged a fortune for their chips. Also, as these MacBook Pro models will be reportedly dropping the touch bar that they've all included in the past, that's also a reasonable saving to bear in mind, so I think we'll be stable on pricing here. Release date. Based on the MacBook Pros arriving in the EEC registrations database alongside the new iPhones and Apple Watches, I'm predicting that the MacBook Pro will be announced at Apple's September event, which I believe will happen on September the 14th, 2021. However, I don't think they will be available the same week. The iPhone and Apple Watch models will likely be available to order from September the 17th and ship on the 27th, and that's the date that I'd expect the orders to open for these, with shipping on October the 1st. Bear in mind we haven't seen iPads added to that EEC list yet, so it looks very much like they are being pushed back a month rather than these MacBooks. So that's everything that we think we know on the MacBook Pro with M1X. Redesigned, more powerful, better displays, more connectivity, and quite possibly one of the best performing notebooks in its class. So let me know down in the comments, will you be buying one? And this is the part of the show where we would normally be answering your questions. Of course, today is a special show, so we're not going to do that. All of the questions are being reserved for tomorrow. But if you want to ask a question for me to answer in a future show, just use hashtag iCaveAnswers down there, and I would be delighted to answer it for you. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you at the big event.